done.
And we're streaming. Okay.
Okay, so everyone's done?
Everyone done with the first question?
So we're gonna see everyone's answers in this with this tool, so we can get a good idea of what everyone's thinking. So what's it?
Let's see.
Fancy. It's all dependent on the Wi-Fi working.
Okay.
All right.
The most repeated word is entertaining.
Entertaining. We see fun, Disney, cute. Deceiving is one that's a little bit different.
Ooh.
That's interesting.
Who's getting ahead of themselves here? Ocean.
Okay. So generally very positive. I think generally very positive comments regarding the movie.
All right. Let's see. Where are you? Here it is. I'm having a hard time with this mouse. Okay. Next question. How many people? 9 people responded out of 14 from the previous question. Okay, never mind. No, the 14 were people who responded multiple times. Okay. So, would you allow your kids to watch Moana alone? So, 56% of you saying yes, and 44% saying no, they have to watch it with me.
But everybody would allow them to watch it.
I mean, maybe people who said no mean that they have like to accompany them to just to sit down.
Yeah.
Not to, because it doesn't have any screenshots like
Okay.
They're saying no, they cannot see it alone.
No, just to be sitting on the chair.
Okay. Okay, but everyone will actually, they don't mind.
My friend who may say yes, who enjoyed or see it's clean movie to see it alone.
But so that's the question. Do you think that this movie is appropriate enough for the kid to watch?
Yeah, but I think he said no just to be sitting because he doesn't have anything.
This is more of a question like of appropriateness. Like, is it appropriate for this to be watched alone? Depending on
Yeah, I understand the question, but I think the people said no just for that reason.
Okay.
It's kind of
so generally people would say yes.
Yeah. The third option that we did not see is no, they will not see it at all.
Right.
That was the third option.
Everyone says it's okay to watch. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Does the movie
Moana propagate any potentially harmful ideas?
By the way, I had an update on the question. Now it's 60% saying yes. Okay, over here we have 3 options. All right. Reload.
Make sure the people that are streaming, they just go to stpaul.org.
To see the streaming? Yeah. stpaul.org/stream. All right. Does the movie Moana propagate any potentially harmful ideas? 20% saying yes, duh. 50% saying maybe a little bit. 30% no, and no one thinks we're paranoid. Thank God. That was the 4th option. No way, you're being paranoid. Okay. That was the 4th option. All right, next. On average, how long does your child watch any screen per day? And you tell us the age of your child and how long. And if you have any. Like if we don't have anything beyond second, for example. Where is it? Come on. There it is. Correct. So let's see. 1 square is like about 8 hours. So it's kind of like 3 hours a day. Most of people said here.
That makes sense. 2?
Yep.
2 or 3 hours?
Okay. The age is like up till 1, like up till 8. Alright.
Does everyone include like any type of screen? TVs, like a cell phone, tablet? I included it all, right?
Yeah, I include that in the question. Alright, next. Loading. Okay, what do you believe are the benefits of family movie nights? Quality time, start to talk, family time, having fun together as a family and bonding. Fun for the kids, especially with the discussion afterwards. Fun for the kids and beneficial with discussion afterwards. I get it again. Well, two people are thinking the same thing. Discuss the movie as a third. Bonding family time as long as it represents value and faith appropriate ideas. So two things are repeated like family time and discussion after. That's good. That's good. And that's probably the last question. Okay, which media resources do you trust for your child? Disney? We have a problem here. Any resource needs to be under supervision? None. Having fun. Wait, what? Okay. There's two extremes. There's Disney and there's none. Okay, and that's for you, Eric.
Okay, thanks, Sharif. Okay, that was good. It was insightful.
Also, you're still in your app on your phone. You can like ask questions, put in your questions, and we'll answer them at the end.
Okay. Thanks, Sharif. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. We thank you everyone for coming tonight. Especially thanks to all the servants. They're not here right now. Some of them are here. They did a lot of work, as you guys can tell, setting this up, and they're pretty awesome. They really. I mean, they don't do this out of duty, especially, the ones that did it. They do it because they really love your children. What you see tonight is basically their work, and I just had to present it. So it's the fruits of all their labor, so I appreciate everything that they do. So we talked a little bit through that quiz or whatever, or that questionnaire about the movie Moana. Do you guys have any other comments about the movie that you want to share up front? Or has everyone said their piece? Okay, awesome. So I think when they first came up with this idea, this was presented during our servants meeting, and myself, I wasn't totally sold on the idea because we tend to, maybe I overlooked it. Even with Moana, we see that I watched Moana before, and I didn't notice nothing wrong until we started this idea, and then I had to go watch it and review it. And when I started watching it and looking for certain things at it from a kid's perspective, then you start to see a lot of things that could potentially influence kids. And I think maybe most people here have one or two kids and they have more experience. And I'm sure they see those things. But a lot of times it takes training to understand exactly what our kids themselves, especially the younger ones, are observing and what they're taking from what they're watching. And there's a lot of research and studies, which we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, that will tell you how the media and how other influences that they see, whether on small screen, whether at school, how it impacts their behavior. And it's actually pretty stunning. And I myself was kind of taken aback by all the research. This saying from St. Clement Alexander is really nice. It says, "The primary lesson for life must be implanted in the soul from the earliest age. The primary lesson for children is to know the eternal God, the one who gives everlasting life." So as parents, we're stewards of our children. God gave us this gift. And our job is to really preserve their holiness, and we all know that. Sometimes it takes a reminder too, and time is a factor, but that is really our job as parents. And the nice thing about this first sentence is it talks about the earliest age. So there's no, wait till they're 4 or 5 when they can understand something. It's like from the beginning, we have to take the initiative and teach our kids about faith and about God. So it's not really just about protecting them from wrong ideas. Like we see Moana. Moana doesn't really have any obvious issues with it. It's not really obviously that bad. But it's not just about protecting them from the wrong ideas. It's about instilling them or making correlations between what they see and instilling in them the faith that we have. And that has to start at the earliest age. It's like a foundation that we're building up. Our kids are really at a disadvantage. I mean, I know growing up in the 80s and the 90s, we had TV, right? But it was limited a little bit. And the shows back then, if anyone has seen the shows were like completely conservative. If you go back and watch a show in the 90s now, you'll be like, that's amazing. Like there's nothing that is anything like today. Now our kids are really faced with a lot of different influences and a lot of things that are, it's a change in the society and the values of our society. It's becoming a very liberal society. So we have, unknown influences, whether it's media, whether it's our their friends, their teachers. The value system of society is shifting, and it's shifting way to the left, way away from what our beliefs are. So we have to be, as parents, even more vigilant about what they're watching. Even the things that we consider safe are probably not safe because the values of society are changing so much. We have a few known positive influences in the lives of our children. Obviously, the church, the servants inside the church, and parents. We're the critical ones. We're the ones who see them most of the week. The servants maybe see them on a Sunday for a little bit, but really it's about us as parents to make sure we're vigilant about what they're watching and what they're consuming. So the negative influence in the kids' lives is not necessarily that something just happens. They watch one show or they watch an episode of Moana and they're instantly impacted by it. But it's over time, these things start to chip away at their value system, at how they feel and how they view themselves. And you'll see the studies really show that TV and movies start to form the way kids view the world and the way they view themselves even. A lot of the issues with the kids is what they see, and that actually over time chips away at them and makes them view themselves in a different light. So that's why it's so critically important that we're involved and we're always around them. So in terms of media usage, so the average American children watches about 4 hours of TV daily. Now I've seen numbers as high as 8 or 9, and if we factor in, that's when you factor in social media. As they get older, I mean, even if you look at us as parents, we're probably 90% of our time our phone is within reaching distance. So those numbers are going up. The interesting part is that under age of 8 is 2 hours, but the small screen usage has now gone up to 48 minutes. From, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, it was around 10 minutes. So the screens are getting smaller, so we have a little bit less ability to track what they're doing. Whereas if it was on the TV, you're pretty aware of what they're watching on TV. And this is really this unbalance when it comes to influences in their lives. Like we have the media, it's obviously their TV watching is quite high. Their friends at school, their teachers, and then us, right? How many times do we get the chance to sit down and have conversations with them where we're listening to them and conversing with them? So there's this unbalanced negative impact that if we left unattended could get out of control. And these changes in our kids we may not see instantaneously. It may form over time. So a few impacts, just physical impacts on our kids when it comes to the media. A lot of studies, population-based studies, continue to show that there are correlations between excessive television viewing in early childhood and that correlate to cognitive language and social and emotional delays. This is from the American Academy of Pediatrics from 2016. So the more TV that they watch, the more it impacts their ability to think, to develop their language, to form relationships, and also to express their emotions. So there's quite a bit of studies that talk about this, and it's a very well-known thing. Weight gain. So as they're younger, there's small but significant increases in BMI, and the interesting thing is it's the foundation that eventually, as they get older, it sets the stage for weight gain as they get older. That's the second impact from a physical aspect. And the third one is it impacts sleep. So you'd think maybe with just toddlers, with older children who are watching TV, that it affects their sleep patterns. That makes sense. But even infants who are exposed to TV in the evening hours show significantly shorter nighttime sleep duration than children with no evening exposure. So infants, when they don't even know what's going on, the light or whatever about the TV impacts their ability to sleep. So there's definitely a correlation between TV and sleep issues with children. So two main things when it comes to impacting our children are what they're watching and our involvement as parents. Experimental evidence shows that switching from violent content to educational or pro-social content results in significant improvement in behavioral symptoms. So what they're watching, in this case, they're talking about violence, but that can apply to any other type of bad thing, is that impacts their behavior. But if we allow them to watch more educational content, that is a significant improvement in behavioral symptoms. So it's important that they're watching stuff that's actually good for them. A design, like an example would be Sesame Street. Obviously, Sesame Street has positive things. We still need to be around and watch it to make sure the messages are clean. But Sesame Street has an example of something that showed it can improve cognitive literacy and social outcomes for children's age 3 to 5. One thing I will warn against is the App Store, under the educational section, the App Store doesn't necessarily mean it's good. The App Store is littered with stuff that people just put in there and they classify it as educational. So be really careful. A lot of those have shown to either have no help at all to the child or a negative impact. So just because it's a negative doesn't necessarily, just because it's educational doesn't necessarily mean that it's helpful. The second thing is one study in particular found that inappropriate content and inconsistent parenting had a cumulative negative effect on low-income preschoolers' executive function, their ability to think and make decisions, whereas warm parenting and educational content interacted to produce additive benefits. So it's not just about having the educational stuff, it's having us sit down with them and go through that content and talk to them and explain it to them, that's what's going to make our children be better in terms of thinking, be better in terms of their schoolwork and their academics, and better in terms of making decisions and also in their relationships as well. So it's critically important that we watch their content and we also that we're also present as they're consuming content. It's definitely very, I know even my daughter's lesson 2, but it's still very, enticing to just throw something in front of them. Sometimes I wish she had more attention, that she would just sit there and stare at the screen. But luckily she doesn't have very good attention yet. So let's look at one case study. If we look at TV violence, okay? A lot of the studies revolve around violence because it's something that's very quantifiable. But hundreds of studies have found that children who are exposed to violence on TV or video games or whatnot, they have 4 potential outcomes. I'm just talking about violence because that's a lot of studies are on, but if you look at it, this can apply to sexual behavior, this can apply to language issues, lots of different things. The first thing about violence is kids can become immune or numb to the horror of violence. So they see it so many times that it just doesn't impact them anymore. And it's the same thing, I think, when I consider myself when I'm watching TV. When I first started watching, when the shows started getting worse and worse in the 90s and the 2000s, you start to notice, like, that's bad, that's bad. As you continue to watch it, and in the last few years, now you just don't notice it anymore. Something that's bad language or some sexual joke or whatever, sometimes you just don't even notice, right? It comes to the kid with the same thing with kids and violence, that they see it, and maybe in the beginning it impacts them, but eventually they just become numb to it. It doesn't really bother them anymore. The second thing is kids begin to accept violence as a way to solve their problems. So you see in movies that the good guy beat up the bad guy, the good guy was the hero. The kid's now correlating that with, okay, that's how I can solve my problems, is through violence. The third thing is now that they've accepted it as a way to solve their problems, they begin to imitate it. They take it out on their sibling, they take it out on their friends at school. I mean, we see this even if they're watching sports, when they get older, they see the violence and, they can kind of accept it as normal, and then they start to do the same thing. I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying that this is bad. We just have to regulate it. We have to be present for it. But the scariest one, I think, is number 4. Studies show that kids start to identify with certain characters, whether they're the victims or the victimizers. So this is basically saying kids are becoming what they watch. They're seeing that they're being molded by these images that they're seeing on TV, and they may associate themselves with, or they may identify with that character who's getting beat up. They feel bullied, or they identify with the character who is the one doing the beating up. So kids, and the impact of TV on them is that it starts to change who they are. It starts to mold them. And when they're young, that's when they're forming their thoughts and their foundation. So it's invisible to us a lot of the time, unfortunately, and it happens over time, and maybe we don't even notice it. So that's why we have to be vigilant as towards what they're watching, and making sure we're asking lots of questions. And we'll get into, as we go along, we're going to get into ways that we can interact with our kids and make sure that we're aware of what they're thinking and the foundation that they're building. Studies actually find children who view shows in which violence is very realistic, frequently repeated, or unpunished are more likely to imitate what they see. So if they see the characters on there, or the video game person who is always, able to beat up and he doesn't get in trouble, they're like, okay, this is okay for me to do. So just something to keep an eye on when we're watching shows with our kids. So this is what I was referring to earlier in terms of the value system of society, the cultural and moral divide. This is a website called Common Sense Media. So you'd imply it's common sense. It's a nonprofit group that says it's leading the way on safe children media. As part of their blurb on their website, they say the media that perpetuates rigid gender roles and stereotypes can affect children's sense of self, relationships, and career aspirations. Our latest research report explores the effects of gender-biased media on children's development so we can promote more positive, accurate gender representation that gives kids the freedom they need to be themselves. This website, if you dig down deep, even though it's supposed to be something, it provides ratings. Like you can go and look at the movie, you can go see what they rated this movie or this book. But if you dig down deeper, they're promoting a narrative that is in line in thoughts with what the world suggests, especially when it comes to transgender, homosexuality. You know, you guys know about the gender spectrum. Now they're telling kids that, you know, they're not boy or girl. There's a spectrum, and you fall somewhere on that spectrum. So this website's kind of encouraging that. And they're saying that the kids can't have these rigid gender roles of male and female. They have to be allowed to be who they are. So obviously not in line with our beliefs. And so you can't really anymore, when you look at a movie and look at the rating, whether it's PG, whether it's general or whatever, G-rated, whatever it's called, or restricted, you can't really trust that anymore. That doesn't apply. PG is probably, you know, it was probably R 10 years ago. G is probably, you know, whatever. So G is like, just don't watch anything. Just kidding. In particular, I'll give you an example on the website. The website talks about a book called Introducing Teddy, a gentle story about gender and friendship. This is for 3+, it says, and they give it 5 out of 5 stars. They give 5 stars for educational value, 5 star for positive messages, and 5 star for positive role models and representations. The book the concept is this Tibet teddy bear named Thomas wants to change into Tilly. Okay, and it says that the kids need help distinguishing the tricky issues of gender identity, sexual orientation, and gender roles. In particular, it says, as one example, that Teddy plays around with converting a bow tie into a hair bow. Okay, so it's helping kids understand that they can be boy or girl or whatever they want. It's about making them feel comfortable with gender change. And they give it 5 out of 5. So again, can't really trust this safe resource for our children if we're trying to align them with our Christian beliefs. Disney, which I know a lot of people talked about and said that it's a safe resource. Disney is actually one of the biggest supporters of homosexuality, LGBT movement in the world. They have an unofficial gay day that's been going on since 1991. You can see the rainbow in the picture. They have one of the largest gay pride events in the world, which is over 150,000 attendees each year. And now they've started to introduce characters with this LGBT movement. So GLAAD, which is one of the organizations, you guys know GLAAD, it's Gays and Lesbians Association, it's about gay rights. They actually rank the movies and they rate them based on their gay content, their homosexual content. Finding Dory, one of the more popular movies from Disney, they actually only got an 8% rating, right, Sharif? 8%. And it's because even though 2 of the characters were implied to be homosexual, they didn't come out and just say it. So I'm glad gave them only an 8% rating. But Disney's more than making up for it. If you look at, you guys know Doc McStuffins? It's a popular Disney movie. Last year in 2017, they introduced a pro-lesbian message where the 2 moms were in the episode. And this is targeted for kids aged 3 to 5, this show. So I have to be extra careful when we're letting kids watch. We think Doc McStuffins is no big deal. We'll put our kids in front of the TV. And then next thing they know, they see 2 moms. Okay? So I know I was talking to a friend the other day, and she said that the child that she nannies for, she came home and was talking about, you know, the girl's 4 years old. She was talking about how the girls at school were talking about marrying each other. And it wasn't in the sense of having fun playing. It was more of the sense that, like, that's okay. So the message isn't no longer waiting till we get older. Like, when we talked about sex ed when we were younger, it was till when we were in high school or whatever. Now that's all being introduced at a very young age, because to the world, it's a human rights issue. And that's why they're saying, well, we need to be inclusive. So they're starting it with the kids very young, and it's on mainstream TV, including Disney. So the impact of parents. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be extra negative. There's definitely hope. This study from 2008 says the formative years of parental mediation research served to determine that parental mediation does indeed make a difference in children's lives. We are definitely the ones who can now influence our children and make sure they have the right foundation. A Greek saint, a recent saint, Elder Paisios, says, when your children are still small, you have to help them understand what is good. That is the deepest meaning of life. Again, this concept is small, and St. Clement said earlier when they're young, and now we see it more and more in the world. We have to start young. We have to start and get ahead of what the world is teaching our kids. So it's really critical, even if we think our kids don't understand, is to get ahead of it and make sure we're the ones giving them the message. We're the ones leading the way on that. So getting into some ways that we can mediate. We'll get into like the more realistic ways of doing things. So what can we do as parents? When the kid is under 2 years old, first thing is the best thing to do is do not let them watch TV. Under 2 years old, it is detrimental to how the kids grow and how their minds are formed. It says children under 2 years old need hands-on exploration and social interaction and to fully develop their cognitive language, motor, social, and emotional skills. It is shown that TV will most definitely have an impact to your kid if they're under 2 years old. Tasks such as persistence, impulse control, emotional regulation, creative thinking are best taught when they're under 2 through unstructured social settings and not digital settings. So definitely when they're under 2, do your best. I mean, if they're on the airplane and they're freaking out, it's okay. We all take our phones out, but as they get under 2, we should really restrict what they're watching. Now we're going to talk about 3 forms, because kids are obviously going to watch TV. So there's 3 forms of parental mediation that we need to focus on. We're going to talk specifically about one tonight. The first one is restrictive. This is the one we're all very familiar with. This is where we generate rules and limit their children's time spent consuming media or the content that the child is allowed to access. So this is something that all of us need to do, and we need to do it consistently and always. And I'm not saying we throw this one out. We're just going to talk about the second one a little bit more today. But restrictive studies have shown that restrictive is most influential on changing the children's behavior, especially when it comes to aggression and violence, as well as other outcomes such as language and their ability to think. The second one, which is the one we're going to talk about tonight, is the active mediation. This is where we watch a movie like Moana, and parents discuss the characters' choices, the themes, or the components of the media that was consumed in their child. And the intent here is not to just tell our kids what is good and what is not. It's to make them think. We're training our kids. We're not enforcing them exactly how we think on them. We are training our children to think. And that's the intent of this particular form of mediation. This is the one we're going to focus on tonight. The last one is co-viewing. Co-viewing is when you sit, you listen to, or you read a book, or you play with your children, or you watch TV with them. You're not really necessarily interacting with them, but you're just sitting there with them. And that's important because when you're sitting watching a movie with your children, even if you're not saying anything, you're validating to them that what you're watching is okay. So if you're watching something that may be edgy or whatever, no, I mean, we're not doing that with our kids, but in general, something that may be not great for our kids, you're validating that the violence they're seeing or whatnot could be okay. So co-viewing is very important. It's a very good tool, but it's also important that what we're watching is safe for them. Okay, so let's look at the impact of active mediation. This is when we're talking with our kids when we're watching a movie. The first impact of active mediation is it makes our children become critical consumers of media, which is the whole point of all this exercise. It's when they grow up and they're watching TV by themselves that they're not taking the media and saying this is truth. We all make that, we all have that issue. Sometimes we see something on a website or on TV and we just assume that it's true. We're trying to teach our kids to take what they're consuming and think about it and make a judgment call on it. We're giving them the foundation, the tools, the faith in God, that they'll make a judgment based on our beliefs and not on just on the worldly beliefs. So it provides a means of exploring and clarifying media content between parents and children with the aim of helping children to become critical consumers of media. As we talked about earlier, the media forms can have a huge impact on who our kids become, and it forms some of their thoughts. So we have to teach them right away that TV is not truth. You know, take what you're reading, you're seeing, analyze it, think about it, and then make a judgment on it based on faith and based on our belief system and not necessarily the belief system around the world. So we're not trying to make them necessarily cynical about TV. We're not trying to say, you know, TV's bad. We're just trying to say, like, analyze it. Don't take it as truth. The second impact of active mediation is it decreases the negative behavior. Studies have shown, this one in particular in 2014, that if you openly talk to your children and your adolescents about negative attitudes about programs that are featuring violence or aggressive characters, there is a direct correlation with a decrease in their own violent behavior. So again, this is talking about violence, but it's the same thing. When you're openly talking to your children, and when talking, I'm not just saying telling, we're talking back and forth, is that there is a direct connection with their behavior change. The third impact is protective effect. So when we are, when we're watching a show with our kids and we're talking to them about it, it gives them this sense of safety, and it can protect them against their vulnerability to negative effects of the media, aggression, substance use, and sexual outcomes. Again, this is kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. When they feel like they're the victim or they feel like they're the one going to, being the bully or whatnot, us being present, us talking to them about it, will probably get this stuff out of them earlier before it becomes an issue, right? They may express something, and that's why it's so important to listen to what they're saying. They may express something about how they're being impacted by what they're watching. Kids are definitely vulnerable at a young age, and they don't have the ability to make these decisions, so they need us to provide this protective effect and protect them from what they're hearing and how it's changing who they are, and hopefully not changing who they are. And finally, I think the most important one is improved communication. So studies have shown that parent-child open disclosure at an early age may increase the likelihood of adolescent disclosure about friends, school, daily activities, including media consumption. So if we're talking to our kids and we're creating this environment of sharing when they're younger, as they grow older, they'll continue to do it. It'll be natural for them. They'll feel comfortable with you. And studies have also shown that the best way to get information out of your older kids is through their own disclosure to you. It's not through you trying to monitor everything they're doing. Kids will naturally tell you what they're doing if they feel comfortable enough. So our ability to sit with them on these movie nights and talk to them and have conversations creates that comfort with you that they will eventually continue that on as they get older. And I mean, as an adolescent, I know, talking to your parents when I was an adolescent, not adolescent anymore, that's really important. Sometimes our kids want to talk to us. I remember specifically wanting to talk to my parents about stuff when I was younger, but they have to be comfortable to do that. And that's what we have to create early on. I think sometimes when we see a bad thought or a bad idea, our instinct is to just tell them, no, that's terrible, don't do that. And that has a negative impact on them. And they may not want to talk to you because they may not feel the autonomy to go and tell you how they're feeling, right? So if we look at Moana, so Moana has a few different concepts. So they talk about this mythology, the Polynesian mythology. Disney tries to bring in different religions and other things into their movies, which is fine. That's not what we're here to say that that's bad. But they've definitely introduced different concepts. In this one in particular, there's the idea of multiple gods. Gods are like the mother to Tefiti, right? Tefiti, I knew that, but it's late. They worship the island, right? This is actually, this is based on real people's beliefs. Even Maui is based on their beliefs. That's part of their religion or their belief system. So there's this concept of multiple gods or concept of a god in the form of an island. Tefiti, it mentions in the movie, has the power to create anything, and she can bring life to the ocean. Maui is a demigod, so he's partially human, partially God, and he has a magical hook. So, I mean, all of them sound, and then she talks, and there's a part where she's disobedient to her father, and that's kind of encouraged by her grandmother. Now, I mean, I think most of your kids are pretty young, but there's some who are older kids. Do you guys think that this would have any impact on them from your standpoint? I know you guys, Jacqueline, your kids are older. David's older. Would he have?
So he is still young.
So he's still
we
young.
watched the movie together in the theater, so I mean, we took the nice and fun part of it.
Yeah.
But she knows that this is fake. We are just watching to have fun.
She knows fake.
So she does know we have only one God that we worship.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Did you have to tell her that, or was that something did she ask?
She knows that from Sunday school, from church. I mean, we live that in our lives. So she knows that Moana is just a fun movie. I know David by now should be past that level.
Yeah.
I hope so. But we have other challenges with older age because there's so many other challenges that are a lot more serious than just watching a movie and see the hidden meanings in it.
Okay.
All the types of games they play, especially Fortnite. Where we have talks and talks and talks about it, and we try to minimize the time we spend in front of that, and of course not encouraging.
It's a video game.
It's a video game. You don't want to know.
Very popular.
You have girls. It's
very popular.
promoting some kind of not violence per se, but it's not so pleasant. It's just killing. It's all fake, but. The amount
but it's still violence.
On that, having your mind dedicated
it impacts them.
In general, not only that.
Sure.
It's in multiple other things. So, and of course, he knows that PG-13, this is not to be watched, but the general, it's okay, but under the general false things that we still need to monitor. They haven't been allowed to watch any new movie on their own. We watch movies together, either at home or in the movie theater. I'm always with them.
Yeah.
But Doc Makes Stuffings is something that Timmy used to watch all the time, and I never noticed that of the two moms or two dads, whatever idea it was. It sounds scary now, but she's past that age.
There's still gonna be new stuff coming. Yeah.
So I was terrible mom years ago too, but
And she was probably okay with that.
Them all the time.
All the time.
We talk all the time, watch what they are watching. Spending time in front of media is a horrible thing, either an iPad or
it's bad for sure. I mean, I think I agree with you in terms of like the multiple gods thing. It's probably something our kids I don't know, you guys know, they probably may not even notice or not take seriously because a lot of our kids spend time in church and they know what we believe. But that's still, in terms of active mediation, it doesn't necessarily have to be a wrong idea that we have to jump in and say, this is wrong. You could actually, Focus on the Family talks about this a little bit, that you can take what you're seeing and you can make a Christian message out of it. Like Maui is a partially human god, right? We could bring that up and you can ask your kid just simply, what did you think about Maui being this demigod, And they might say something, and then you can make a tie to Jesus and say, well, Jesus, we believe Jesus is fully human and fully God. So it's not just about keeping wrong ideas out, but it's instilling that constantly thinking about what you're watching and then tying that into your faith. And always having God on your mind and on their minds is really important when they go to make decisions that are more serious that you're talking about later. Because if you do that with these simpler concepts, then eventually they're going to do that naturally. Studies show this, that kids will naturally think based on this method of active mediation, the way you teach them to think. And that verse that we didn't read earlier, but the verse in Proverbs talks about train your children up in the way they should go. So that's what we're doing. We're training them. And that includes taking some of this message and making it positive. Focus on the Family says, the mythological Milo parallels that we might expect to see in Greek or Roman gods or goddesses. But the Christian parents who want to engage fully with this film's narrative, there are plenty of compare and contrast observations to be made about how Moana's spiritual outlook overlaps a bit with Christianity and where it differs significantly from it. So even this organization talks about how we can make correlations, and it's almost like giving a little Sunday school lesson at home. You watch the movie, they are entertained, and they also get a nice message from it. So we can also, it talks about, and just another idea in terms of active mediation, it talks about how Moana goes and saves the world. Really nice message, right? We can also say, God wants us to be fellow workers with him, like it's the verse in the Bible, fellow workers with him. So we need to also be like Moana and do his work. Well, what's God's work? We have to love our neighbor, and we have to be nice to those, those people around us. Things like that. I know it sounds funny, but it really does impact how our kids become and how our kids grow up to be.
But don't disobey your dad.
Yeah, don't disobey your dad. That's definitely disobedience to father. It was an interesting thing because at the end of the movie, this disobedience, that she comes back and her dad's so happy to see her. Like, it was just almost nothing. Like, there was nothing, no punishment for it. And like I said, maybe they see it once, the kids see it once, and it doesn't impact them. But if all the shows kind of have these themes, these negative themes, that grows on them, and it becomes in their mind. It's, if we look at how sin happens, sin doesn't happen based on one thing that happens in our life and we're instantly changed. Sin is a thought that gets planted in our head, and we allow it to grow and to get worse until we finally act on it, right? It's the same thing with our kids. These wrong messages, the thoughts go in and they're not, vetted or filtered, and it affects who they become and the way they behave. So one thing to do is make sure we focus on the positive. This is what I was talking about earlier. There's three types of active mediation: negative, positive, and neutral. Try to focus more on the positive or neutral when you're asking questions. Don't be too negative, because studies have shown that it will kind of make the kid have to choose between what you're seeing, your approval, and their ability to make their own decisions, right? Again, we're not trying to limit how them making the decisions. We want them to make the decisions. We just want to get them the tools to be able to do it properly. Like an example of a negative one would be, what a ridiculous idea that an island can be a goddess. Don't believe any of this silliness, right? We're telling them what to believe, and that's not giving them autonomy. An example of positive is, isn't it funny that you have an island who's also God? What do you think of that? And the cool thing is, you'll start to see how that when they answer, you'll start to see how they think, which is really important, because, how many times do we have to get a chance to sit and have a conversation with them about something? We have to take advantage of all these times and to get an understanding of how their mind works. So try to be as positive as possible. A few do's and don'ts. Don't say because I said so. So if you don't know the answer to a question, don't say because I said so. Say, let's go research this together and we'll come up with the best, solution. Do ask lots of questions to your kids. That's the more important part, because we're trying to hear what they say. There's a very good book which will I don't know if you guys have heard of Parenting Towards the Kingdom. Have you guys heard of that? I'll show you guys at the end, but it's a very good book that talks to you about how to interact with your children, how to listen to them, respect them, and treat them as icons of Christ, icons of God, as the author puts it. So we want to ask a lot of questions and see where their mind is at. Don't assume our kids are not impacted by their watch. Try not to assume that. We don't know that. We just don't know that that's how they think. Do use the opportunities to teach our kids about God, as we touched on already. Another don't, when you're having movie nights, try not to don't get all excited and overwhelm your kids with questions every 2 minutes. It's going to drive them crazy, and they're never going to want a movie with you guys again. So gradually start to enter into routine. Ask them 1 question, 2 questions, and then eventually it'll become more natural. So the American Academy of Pediatrics actually recommends these type of movie nights. It says here are the suggestions for it. Encourage discussions with your children, which we've touched on multiple times. Point out positive behavior in the movie so that they start to focus on the positives. And while watching, make connections. Now they talk about making connections with your life and with books, with place of interest, but in terms of us, we also want to make connections with God and with our beliefs, as we talked about. Talk about your personal and family values as it's seen in the movie. And also ask your children to compare what they're watching to real life events, or real events that may be happening in their house. It might be, or in their schools or whatnot. It may be interesting what you could get out of them about what's happening at school that maybe they either figure out about or they chose not to share. Benefits of a family movie night. These are also in these brochures, which you guys can pick up at the end of the night. Sense of unity and closeness. Clearly, if we're spending time with our children, they're going to feel more comfortable around us, and they're going to be more comfortable sharing with us. As we touched on earlier, it opens up a channel of communication, which is, again, I can't emphasize how important that is, especially when they become teenagers and don't want to listen to us. That channel of communication is opened up throughout their adolescence and even into adulthood. We'll see that they're comfortable sharing with us. Teach our children how to think critically. Again, that's our goal here, to train our kids how to think with the right foundation and the right tools, and not just to tell them what to believe. Another important one is preemptively and safely expose kids to culture. A lot of people ask, well, if my kids don't notice that something's bad, why would I tell them? Why would I point out something that they didn't notice in the first place? But like I said earlier, we don't know if it noticed it and what kind of impact it had on them. It may be something that's invisible. And second, before one of those negative influences come out, because the kids go to school, they're friends, they're young, they're talking about things that we would never expect kids to talk about at that age when we were that age. So we want to be the ones who initiate the idea and give them the right beliefs before they're exposed to it by someone else who is completely unregulated, who doesn't have the same beliefs. We need to be the one who are introducing ideas to our kids before they're exposed to them by the world. It also educates us. Like Jacqueline was just saying, Doc McStuffins, we had no idea, right? I mean, it was someone told me about it. I had no idea either. So it's going to, when we're watching these shows with our kids, it's going to educate ourselves about what they are also exposed to. Because, like I said, we can't even imagine what the kids are exposed to. It's just taken such a change over the past 10 to 20 years since we were kids, and now it's crazy. It really comes down. It's crazy what the kids are exposed to right now. So we have to educate ourselves. And active mediation isn't really a mediation tool that requires us to do work. It definitely involves us doing the effort to get ahead of these issues that our kids are going to face. And finally, it gives us, as we touched upon, opportunity to teach our kids about God and faith. And the more times they hear about it, the better, because that is our calling in life, to teach our kids how to become like God and know Him. And that's these movies give us an opportunity to do that. So here's some alternatives. I'm just about done. The alternatives are maybe some of you have some other alternatives. What's in the Bible? I actually don't know a lot of these, but VeggieTales. Monica knows.
It's really cool.
VeggieTales.
VeggieTales is all stories from
Yeah.
Bible.
Okay.
It's really cool.
It's so nice.
That's good. And Monica loves Superbook, Adventures in Odyssey, and Sesame Street. So there's a few things to be careful about. No, Disney. Yeah. Well, they might be by now. I don't know. Last I checked, they aren't. But you never know, right? It could change. Could be tomorrow they introduce someone.
One good thing is they introduced an autistic character.
Yeah. Oh, they did. No, that's good. There's definitely good things, and Sesame Street is known to be one of the good options. There is some things to be careful about, obviously, when it comes to Orthodoxy versus a lot of these are coming from a Protestant background. So, St. Mary is married, having other children in some of these. So, again, we still need to be present. I mean, we throw them in front of the TV and put on all these shows, but then they have we have to make sure that what they're hearing is still Orthodox in its beliefs. So these are the two books that I want to talk about. Parenting Toward the Kingdom is really, really good. Orthodox Christian Principles of Child Rearing. And I recommend it to everybody. It's very interesting and he brings up examples about how to interact with your kids in different situations. It's really excellent, and I really recommend that. Oh yeah, so the Mothers Group at St. Mary's is starting in 2 weeks. This book next weekend. So that's available for anyone who wants to go. The Marketing of Evil is also another interesting book. For those of us who don't know, the idea of LGBT and transgender and all that thing, 50 years ago, it was considered like just terrible, like it was awful, right? There was a group of people who actually made it their effort to market. They said in 30 years, we want to have a certain acceptance of our way of life in society. So they actually made a conference. They got together all the greatest thinkers in that community, and they created a marketing plan. There's an actual marketing plan. LGBT is just one example, but they made a marketing plan and they executed on it. And the whole goal was to take what society thought was awful and terrible back then, and they kind of wrapped it up into something nice, and they executed it on perfectly. So they marketed this lifestyle, and now they have exactly what they wanted. That now it's a matter of human rights. It's something that is about tolerance, about fairness, about generosity, And that's what they set out to do. And this book explains not just LGBT, but other types of what we would consider evil or sin, and how it became so normalized, and how it became the opposite. Whereas if you don't agree with that, you're a bigot or you're small-minded or whatnot. So these are two excellent books that I recommend, and hopefully help us deal with helping our kids as they grow and face these issues when they go to the world. And that's all I have for that.
Instead of doing that, I'm gonna let it be like this. Where is his mouse?
Are you doing more questions or?
No, if you want to repeat the questions.
No. So, is there any questions or comments or what you guys have experienced that we want to share with each other? I mean,
You mentioned something about Finding
Dory, yeah.
There was a
Couple of characters that they were implied to be homosexual, but the Disney never came out and said. But that's been in a few movies now where, that's the rumor. I mean, even going back in the day when was it Sesame Street that had Bert and Ernie?
Bert and Ernie, yeah.
That was also, there was like talk of them being, so it's there, but some movies don't come out and say it. They imply it in the movie, or sometimes our kids are smart enough to pick up on it, but just to be aware. Now that's probably not even going to happen. Now they're just going to come out and say it, right? Because now it's accepted, it's normalized. It's quite the opposite. That is the normal way, and we're the awkward ones now.
All right. Now, throughout the presentation, you could have asked any questions if you have on the Meti.com. Okay, if you haven't already, you can do it. Already. That's my question, by the way.
That's you?
Yeah, I cheated.
Showing martyrdom and torture safe for kids.
Yeah, we're gonna have a movie night next Thursday with such movie next Thursday.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. There's some torture and some violence in that. I don't know what age. I wouldn't necessarily expose it to young kids. I know Monica's still frightened from her childhood watching safe movies. So I think it's all about the amount they're exposed. The studies and the research show that when kids are continuously seeing these violence and these violent scenes and they go unpunished, that they start to form their minds in the way they look at violence. So I think you have to pick your moments, and you know your kids the best. But we definitely have to be there with them and talking through it as well. If you want to say, I want to say something.
No.
Can I add something? And also, we all know our kids, and just for at least mine, it's just be considerate to their emotional feelings, and it doesn't make that, they're not tough enough or they cannot handle. Even if they're 13, 14, but it's too violent for them, I think it is okay. Like, I can't watch scary movies and I'm over 30. I cannot. I would go hide under the bed, and I would really have all those scary thoughts, which I think it's okay for me if I don't watch scary movies.
Yeah. Any other comments? You guys got an hour break from your kids.
It makes me wonder, what they're watching, is it really safe for them or not?
Yeah.
Because we've seen Moana, and when you guys pointed out those things, wow, okay, I didn't catch that. I gotta say.
Honestly, I always say that up to. My kids are young, so I know this is one of the things that they are looking at.
Yeah.
They'll be exposed to a lot of things that I can't control. So.
Yes. Out of the movies,
we're gonna have to learn with them.
Yeah, out of the servants reviewed a whole bunch of movies. Moana was picked, but Moana was probably out of all the kids' movies the cleanest one, and that's why we picked it. It was that hard to find the movie.
This plays in the house sometimes.
Yeah.
And I always say this. I don't know if they say it or not, but I know they are not thinking about the gods and all those things yet because mine are.
Yeah, they're young.
Yeah. It's but the only thing I see all the time is the graphics, so I saw them too.
Yeah.
But they still play. We'll see. Hopefully, when they start having conversation, we can talk about this.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it really depends on your age of your child. But definitely starting is when they start interacting with you, that's the time to really get into it. There's no age that's too late to start. So I would be curious to think what they thought about this movie in terms of, you guys sat down with them. Did they actually come up and did they say, oh, I noticed the thing about the multiple gods or the disobedience to her father? Or are they that stuff just entertainment for them?
It was more probing questions that Sandy asked, and they were all like spot on knowing, like, okay, it's just one God, Jesus, and who created everything. So they were like aware, but you have to bring it up to their attention. And they all like, they knew, okay, so this one, we listen to our parents, we don't listen to strangers, and we only worship God, Jesus Christ, and they knew it, but you have to probe the question for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have paid attention.
But the nice thing about that, now that you brought that out of them, next time they see something, they're going to use that. They're going to think about that again.
Exactly.
You know, because they've already consciously said it, they've heard themselves say it, so now it becomes part of their thought structure and decision making. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you going to plan something for older kids, like middle and high school, or not?
Yeah, we could, for sure. We definitely are. So one of the questions we want to talk about is like follow-up series that we're going to do, potentially for older kids. There's something else that I believe Sandy was planning as a follow-up to this. So we are looking for input on what parents want, and then the servants will go and do the research, and we can do that. We definitely have to set that up.
You were talking about the LGBT, and I want to know how we're gonna, because the kids they're gonna see it.
Yeah.
As much as you try to protect them from it.
Yeah.
Shouldn't the church come out with maybe like a discussion with the children and what the church believes, and just make it an open discussion with that?
You mean in like the church, the higher up level, or are you talking about on the lower level where it's servants and the students?
I think the exposure level.
Yeah.
What they exposed to?
Yeah.
I think it should.
So I'll in middle school, for example, we talk about it in the classrooms, and I know they talk about it in high school. I don't know about the younger ages if they're talking about it yet, but it seems like probably it's something that needs to be brought up, and especially under a controlled environment. But definitely 100%. Most of the work comes down to us as parents, because they take what we say as, especially now, as gospel. Especially when they're younger, everything we say to them is truth, and we have to plant that seed young and early so that when these questions start to arise, they have a good foundation. But certainly, the servants of the church have to provide the extra support that they need, and right now we do that. I'm not sure about it at a higher level in terms of. I mean, the church is pretty clear on their stance about LGBT, right? So I think with kids, it's all about relationships. And in relationships with their parents, relationships with the servants, as long as they have that close relationship and they have someone to go to that they feel comfortable talking about, then they'll be okay. The problem is if they hear these ideas at school and they feel like they have no one to go to, then they're going to make their own minds up. And that's the scary part. They need to have support system.
On the website of St. Mary's, there is 4 different sessions that Abu Nayanin talked with the parents about before they do the fight camp for the kids, elementary or middle school and high school, and it's beneficial for everyone to listen to those ones.
What are the fight
sessions? It's not the sessions.
Yeah.
Well, he went over the topics with the parents. What's going to be discussed with the kids during the camp, but it was more dedicated for the parents and how to handle conversations and discussions about those specific topics with their kids. And those sessions are on the website, all of them.
Okay.
They were mostly in Arabic.
Okay.
So everyone can listen to them. That would be great. If you want to have some reference on what Abuna says to the parents, and how we should handle our kids at that age, and how we open discussions with them, and how we touch base on things, and how we handle any kind of events that is unforeseen or unexpected from the kid, how to handle that, not in a way to scare them or to turn them off from talking with us, and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
So many different things. He covered pretty much all of that.
That's on the website?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll put the links in the description of this video.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to share totally an incident with my son that caught me off guard that I was completely unprepared for. We were back from Matthew.
5.
He's 8, turning 8 in 2 months. We were back from a friend's wedding. 7, turning 37. And we don't have any PlayStations, we don't have gaming systems, TV is censored, only few channels. There is really nothing. We have tons of sports, so there's no even time to watch TV after. So we were driving back from the wedding, and he asks me, "Mommy, can a boy marry a boy?" And I just went blank. Like, I am not prepared to have this conversation. And with the grace of God, what came to my mind, I was like, "Matthew, who did God create in the beginning?" He's like, "Adam and Eve." I was like, "Why do you think God created Adam and Eve?" And he was like, "Because she's a girl and he's a boy." I was like, "Exactly. So if God would have wanted boy to marry a boy, don't you think he would have created 2 Adams or 2 Eves?" He's like, "Yeah, it makes sense." And I have no idea how did I come even with this theory, but I was like, that's exactly what the Bible is telling us, that it's Adam and Eve. That's a boy and a girl. And anything else, that's not what the Bible is telling us. And he's like, I knew it. And in my mind, I was like, I didn't want to open into like, how did you know this? But it was such, like, I was not prepared to have this conversation at all. Like, completely. Like, it just suddenly, like, literally, I was like, okay, this is, if I don't answer him, he will continue asking, and I don't want to shut the door on this conversation. At the same time, I didn't want to keep opening, how did you know about this? Because it could have been at school, it could have been he's just thinking about it, or he heard someone at school that has 2 dads, and it might have been just, I don't know how did he hear about
It's
it?
everywhere now. I get it
So-
heard so that's good. That's good.
Simpson, the Simpson cartoon.
Really? Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
The Simpsons is adults cartoon, by the way. It's not children's
It's
cartoon.
adults, it's adults.
It's adult cartoon.
But it's the same channel as cartoon.
Yeah.
Sometimes they
was
play
in the
those
hotel.
like trailers in the middle of the day.
My niece was watching that actually, watching like the channel cartoon, and one time the program switched to Simpson, and it was talking about the relation between men and women, and then I told them, was busy in something, and we came back and found that. I told them, do you understand what it's said? She said, and then I told, like, it was the kids of my sister, I told them, they watching that and they understand. Yeah. But after then I discovered from my sister that actually, when you read them, like, all the time talking about God, growing up them in the church, with real activity in the church, that's protect them. And when its time came, like get older in age, these kids, when they talk to them clearly, to them about what they know that they get exposure to in school or with their friends, that helps them actually to protect them.
Yeah.
And that time, like, God accepts that, and we live in a country, have everything, and we don't have to accept everything happening. These people have their way, and we have our way. And that's for everything, like, in life, using anything. And that's...
We definitely don't, we live in the world, but we don't want to be part of it.
But like, keeping hiding from them the stuff here, it will not help.
No, yeah, they're going to be exposed. They're very exposed. That's why we have to get ahead of it and teach them.
And talk to them clearly about, because if they hear from you first, it's better than they hear it from outside.
Definitely, 100%, absolutely. Thank you. All right. Okay, now we can say a short prayer.